A really good friend of mine has spent the last few weeks in Maine learning to build a bench. So he had always liked woodworking and doing things with his hands, so for his birthday, his parents gave him this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to attend this 2-week class learning woodworking from the experts. So, actually saying he went to build a bench is a little bit too basic for what he actually ended up doing. It sounds as if he went to learn how to hammer a few pieces of wood together with a couple of nails. And that would be what I would be learning how to do if I were to attend a class such as this. But he went to build a real bench. And I don't know exactly how I thought you taught a class on woodworking, but what I assumed was that the students would be given blueprints, and they would be given wood and some nails, and the teacher would talk them through step by step, and then voila, there would be a bench. Well, after he had been there a week and a half, he mentioned that he was getting ready to make his first cut, which I was fairly certain should have happened about, 6 days ago at least. What had they been doing all this time? Well, they had been designing and drawing and planning and practicing, using different tools and techniques and materials, because not all the benches would look the same. Each bench would be an expression of the maker. The blueprint, which existed, came from the imagination and the mind of the one building the bench. It wasn't snapped together IKEA furniture, which is what I can do. I cannot craft from raw materials something with elegance and form and function. What my friend spent most of the time explaining to me was the joinery work of dovetailing. And I had a basis for which he talked. However, I had never stopped to consider all that goes into dovetails. So, probably most of you know this, but dovetailing is when you take, there are tabs on the end of the wood, right? And then they fit into the hollow places of other planks of wood. And when these pieces are interlocked and glued, then no mechanical fasteners like a screw or a nail, none of that's needed, and it fits together really nicely and tightly. From what I've been told, it's a very strong joint. Well, my friend didn't spend his time telling me about fitting the pieces of wood together. He spent his time telling me about the exactness of design needed, and spent his time telling me how important it is to have a sharp chisel every single time, and spent his time telling me that if the pieces don't fit together, well, then you have to start over. And he spent his time mating one tab to another, forming one piece of wood specifically for another piece of wood. He spent all his time talking about working with the materials prior to ever fitting them together. Since there were no nails or screws to be used on this bench, and there were only hand tools, the power and the effort and involvement of the maker was necessary to fashion the wood. The wood was dependent upon the maker and upon the other pieces of wood. And this was just to join two pieces of wood. This had to be replicated over and over and over again. Well, if you had asked him prior to going on this trip, he would have said that he was going to Maine to take a woodworking class, which was true. However, partway through the class, he made a point of asking me to ponder the difference between woodworking and furniture making. And so I did. What's the difference between being a woodworker and a furniture maker? for a piece of furniture to be strong, to be functional, to be well made, the maker has a lot of work to do that nobody ever sees. And not only that, but the maker must see something that nobody else can see. Potential and promise within the materials. Worker says it's a job to me. It lacked creativity and freedom. Furniture making has purpose beyond only function, endurance, and expressionistic beauty, which may explain why there are more woodworkers than furniture makers. Well, King David, he knew how to work with materials. He knew how to build, and he knew how to work. He'd already built a palace, after all. But he was not a furniture maker. Now, I don't want to put words in God's mouth, but I think when David decides to build a house for God, God basically was like, David, you're a good woodworker, but we've got furniture making to do. Let me show you how this is done. I, God, am the maker. And when you are crafting the kind of houses I build, the materials are much different than cedar and stone, much different than wood and nails, and much different than steel and glass. The materials I use are more fleshy, are more vulnerable, more unpredictable, and more unique. Because I use people not to build the house, but to be the house. Because we aren't builders. We aren't the furniture maker. And we aren't the craftsman. We're the raw materials. See, the words God spoke to Nathan and David weren't so much a decision about whether or not a temple should be built or a tent should be built. Whether or not they're going to use stones or whether or not they're going to use burlap. God is saying that the decision on whether or not something is to be built is his alone. And God's already made that decision. God's going to build a house. As my friend pushed me to ponder, it isn't so much that God is just building, but that God is creating, and that it's an ongoing process by which God reads the materials and works with them and shapes them with patience. Crafting a whole house with so many unique materials takes a long, long time. Well, the cynic in me thinks that bricks are easier because they have nothing to say, they don't rebel, they stay where you put them, and they usually stick together. People, not so much. We do rebel, and we do argue, and we do shift, and we most certainly don't always stick together. This is going to be one flimsy house. If God built on the basis of strength and might, but God doesn't. God builds on the Peter Korn principle. Well, Peter Korn teaches on the God principle, actually. So who's Peter Korn? He's a founder of the school. He's a founder of the school that my friend attended. And Peter explained this to the class about why he built, and why he crafted, and why he created. Why he had founded the school in the first place. For 3 reasons. Simplicity, integrity, and grace. I don't know about you, but as I'm trying to hammer a nail in straight, simplicity, integrity, and grace are the last things on my mind. But I believe they are the first things on God's mind. I believe those are the reasons that God creates too. In some ways, the teaching of God, the love of God, and the foundation of God are all crafted by these same tools. which is what makes it so profound. That God knows that this is actually what endures: love and grace, integrity and truth, forgiveness and justice. These things build houses that can never fail and will never crumble. And that's the type of house that God's building. And he's using us. The good thing is, God knows that sometimes we're really difficult to work with. David was brutal, and he committed adultery, and he made a whole lot of mistakes. And God still chose to rest his promise on him. God believes that the strongest, most elegant, safest house is built with flesh and blood. And when we doubt that, when we question whether a house, a humanity, can be built with something so common as frail bodies, we cling to the body of Jesus, in whom we are promised a home is always found. And God rests this promise on us. And Nathan, he proclaimed the call of that promise to you. Did you hear that? Because it wasn't meant only for David. The call was, the Lord declares to you that the Lord will make you a house. You are being used and shaped by love and forgiveness, with honesty and grace, through the body, through the house of Jesus Christ. So that the temple of God is one built not by you, but of you and of me. We become these houses and these tents throughout the world, built to God. So that when safety is needed, a refuge is as close as the person sitting next to you. And that is the house of God. And so that when forgiveness is needed, a temple is just as close as a heart away. And that is the house of God. And when grace is needed, a tent is just around the bend. And that is the house of God. So that no matter where we might go or where we might look, we may know and find that without fail, the house of God has been established in ages past and will continue on forevermore.